The warning. Severa walked slowly through the tall blue grass of her home planet, Zalar 9. The wind whispered through the trees, and the twin moons hung low in the sky. She carried a small basket of healing leaves, gathered from the riverbank. Her long silver hair swayed behind her as she moved. Her people, the Velari, were known for peace, wisdom, and silence. They lived in harmony with nature, but they also had rules. Strange, old rules passed down for thousands of years. One rule stood above all others. Never let a human male eat anything you give him. Severa never questioned it. The elders said it was dangerous. They warned young Velari women with sharp eyes and serious faces. If a human male eats your food, he will take something from you, something you can never get back. But nobody explained what it meant. After all, humans were far away, living on other planets, behind war lines and force fields. Severa had never even seen one. Until that day. That morning, she saw smoke rising in the east woods. Curious, she walked toward it. Her people avoided the forest edges, but she felt no fear. She felt something else. A pull. As if something was calling her. She moved carefully through the trees and found something she had never seen before, a crash site. A small ship, burned and broken. Pieces of metal scattered in the grass. And near the wreck, a man. He was human. She froze. He was lying on his back, face pale, his chest rising and falling slowly. Blood stained his uniform. He was unconscious, but alive. Severa looked around. No one was nearby. Her heart beat faster. Every Velari story she had ever heard screamed in her mind. Danger. Leave. Do not touch the human. But then, the man groaned in pain. She stepped closer. His skin was tan, with short dark hair and a rough beard. His body looked strong, but broken. Bird marks covered his arms. Severa bent down and touched his forehead gently. He was hot, burning with fever. She had a choice. Walk away and let him die, or break the rule. Severa wrapped his body with vines to make a sled, then dragged him slowly through the woods, hiding him under leaves and shadows. It took her 3 hours to bring him to a secret cave far from the village. She made a bed of moss and cleaned his wounds. She used her healing leaves. She sang an old Velari song. That night, the man opened his eyes for the first time. "Where am I?" he whispered. "You are safe," Severa said softly. "Don't speak too much." He looked at her, confused. "You're not human, are you?" "No," she said. "I'm Velari." He stared at her glowing blue eyes and soft voice. "You saved me." Severa said nothing. The next day, the man, Jake, tried to sit up. He was weak. His stomach growled. "I'm starving," he said, laughing a little. "Do you have food?" Severa hesitated. The warning echoed in her mind like thunder. Never let a human eat anything you give him. But Jake looked so helpless, so human. She stood up. "I will bring something." She walked to the back of the cave and cooked a small meal from root herbs and fire fruit. It was warm, sweet, and soft, a comfort food of her people. She returned and placed it before him. Jake smiled. "Smells amazing. Did you make this?" Severa nodded, heart racing. Jake picked up a piece and took a bite. The moment he swallowed, a strange wind blew through the cave. Severa felt her chest tighten. Her skin shivered. Something unseen moved between them, like a thread pulling them closer. Jake blinked. "Did you feel that?" Severa stepped back. "No," she said quickly, even though she had. Jake kept eating. "Tastes like home," he said. Severa watched him in silence. What had she just done? The old rule was not just a tale. She could feel it now. A bond had started. A thread had formed. Something had awakened inside her. Far away, in the village, the elders looked toward the sky. One of them whispered, "The human has eaten. She has broken the warning." He took a bite. The moment Jake took the second bite, Severa's breath caught in her throat. He chewed slowly, unaware of what he had just done. His eyes closed briefly, as if the taste brought him peace after weeks of pain. But Severa wasn't at peace. Inside her chest, something was humming. It wasn't her heart. It was something deeper, like a thread tugging at her soul. She turned her face away, trying to breathe. Her hands shook. Her skin felt warmer, almost glowing under the dim light of the cave. Jake looked up at her, smiling faintly. "This is the best thing I've eaten in weeks," he said, voice rough from thirst. "Thank you, Severa." She opened her mouth to reply, but her voice had disappeared. She just nodded. Outside the cave, a cold wind blew through the trees. Birds fell silent. The woods around them seemed to hold their breath. Inside the village, Elder Vuma opened her eyes suddenly. She sat up from meditation, her long silver robe falling from her shoulders. "It has happened," she whispered to the other elders. One of them fed a human. The others gasped. Who? Which daughter disobeyed? But Elder Vuna didn't answer. She stared into the fire. The flames twisted and danced, forming the image of a glowing figure with long silver hair. Severa. Back in the cave, Severa sat silently, watching Jake sleep. He had eaten the entire bowl. Now he lay wrapped in soft moss, breathing slowly. But Severa couldn't rest. Her skin shimmered under the moonlight, not just glowing now, changing. Her fingertips tingled, and small, faint lights moved under her veins like tiny stars. She held up her hand and watched it glow softly. Then she heard something, a voice, not from the outside, but inside her mind. "You have fed the forbidden. You have awakened the link." She gasped, stepping back. "Who's there?" she whispered aloud. Silence. But her body knew. Her mind knew. She had broken the oldest Velari rule, and now she was no longer fully Velari. Jake woke up in the morning, feeling different. His wounds had closed faster than expected. He stretched his arms and blinked. "I feel good," he said, surprised. Severa handed him a cup of water without a word. "You okay?" Jake asked, noticing her silence. She nodded, trying to hide her shaking hands. "Tell me something," Jake said after a moment. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." Severa looked at him, eyes filled with conflict. "Because you were hurt," she said simply. "And because I couldn't leave you." Jake smiled. "You're kind. That's rare out here." Severa stood up and turned away. She didn't feel kind. She felt wrong. That night, Severa walked deep into the woods, seeking answers. She stopped at the ancient stone, where the old spirits were said to speak. Kneeling down, she placed both hands on the stone and whispered, "I broke the rule. I fed the human. What is happening to me?" The stone stayed silent. But then, the wind shifted. A cold breeze wrapped around her like a cloak. Suddenly, a voice, deep and ancient, entered her mind. "You gave him food, but not just food. You gave him part of your energy, your essence." The moment he tasted it, the link began. "What link?" she whispered. "A bond that ties Velari and human, a connection of soul and blood. It cannot be undone." Severa fell to her knees. "But I didn't mean to." "Intent does not stop the link," the voice replied. "It has begun." "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You will change, and so will he." "Into what?" But the voice faded. Severa returned to the cave, her mind racing. Jake was asleep again, but this time, she felt it. His dreams were touching her thoughts. She could see flickers, memories that were not hers. A planet with yellow skies. A human base. A boy and his mother. A war. A crash. Her heart beat faster. She was in his memories. The next day, Jake walked out of the cave, feeling stronger. He looked at Severa and smiled. I think I'm healing faster because of you." She stayed silent. "Do all Velari heal people like this?" he asked. Severa hesitated, then answered honestly. "No, this is not normal." Jake paused. "Then what is it?" Severa looked into his eyes. "You ate something sacred to my people. It connects us now. I don't know what will happen next." Jake laughed a little. "You make it sound like I just married you." Severa looked away, her face pale. "That's not far from the truth." Jake blinked. "Wait, what?" But she didn't explain. She couldn't. Meanwhile, back in the village, Elder Vuma stood before the Council of Silence. Severa has made contact with the human. "Then the prophecy has started," one elder whispered. "Should we bring her back?" "No," Vuma said. "We watch. We wait. The link must complete itself." "But what if she loses control?" Vuna's eyes narrowed. "Then we must destroy her, before the link destroys us all." Changes. Severa stood at the edge of the silent river, her reflection shimmering under the moonlight. But the face staring back wasn't the same anymore. Her once pale eyes now glowed faint gold. Her skin, once smooth like moonstone, showed tiny threads of light pulsing beneath the surface. She reached up and touched her face, hoping it was just her imagination. It wasn't. The changes had begun. She could feel them in her breath, in the way her senses had sharpened. Every drop of water, every leaf falling from a tree, every heartbeat. She could hear them all. Even Jake's heartbeat, echoing from the cave behind her like a quiet drum. The link, it was real. She never wanted this. She had only meant to save a dying man. But now, part of her was being rewritten. By him. Back in the cave, Jake was packing up what little he had. His strength had returned quickly, too quickly, actually. Just 3 days ago, he couldn't move without pain. Now he felt like he could run a mile. He noticed it yesterday when he touched a sharp stone, and the small cut vanished within minutes. "Weird," he muttered. "I'm healing like a superhuman." But the real change was in how he felt near Severa. The closer he stood to her, the more calm he felt. Like standing next to a silent storm that somehow made the world quieter. He didn't understand it. And she wasn't telling him anything. Jake walked outside and saw her standing by the river. "You okay?" he asked. She turned to face him slowly, her glowing eyes catching the starlight. Jake froze. "Whoa, your eyes. They're different." Severa looked down. "Yes, everything is." "What's happening to you?" She stepped back. "You are what's happening to me." "Me?" She nodded. "When you ate the food I made, something ancient was awakened. The link, it connects your kind and mine in ways you don't understand." Jake blinked. "Okay, wait. I know I was hungry, but are you telling me that me eating your soup did this to you?" "Yes. That's insane." "It's true." Severa walked past him and sat on a mossy rock. She looked tired, but not in the normal way. It was as if she was fighting herself. "The link is rare," she said softly. "It only happens when a Velari woman gives food to a human man with good intent, with care, with heart. Our people call it soul sharing." "And what happens next?" Jake asked, sitting beside her. She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "We begin to change. Both of us." That night, Severa dreamed. She was standing on a bridge of light, floating between 2 stars. On one end was her village, calm, glowing, full of songs. On the other end, Earth, a planet she'd never visited, but now felt connected to. In the dream, she saw herself, but different. Her hair was shorter. Her clothes were human. She was walking hand in hand with Jake, and her eyes were full of joy. But behind them, something dark was watching. A shape made of shadow and fire. A warning. "Not all will accept the link," the dream whispered. "Not all want peace." She woke up with sweat on her skin and a taste of ash in her mouth. In the village, Elder Vuna watched the stars from the top of the stone tower. A younger Velari, Kale, approached her. "The human still lives," he said, "and Sivera is no longer like us." Vuna nodded. "She walks a path few have survived." "What will she become?" "Something new, something dangerous, or something beautiful. We will see." Kale clenched his fists. "We should stop this before it's too late." Vuna looked at him. "And risk breaking the prophecy." Kale frowned. "You still believe in that old story? A Velari and a human will one day unite and bring either peace or destruction," Vuna recited. "Yes," Kale said, "and I fear which one is coming." Meanwhile, Jake and Sivera sat near the fire inside the cave. Jake was sharpening a piece of metal to use as a tool when Sivera suddenly held her hand over the flames. Her palm began to absorb the heat. The fire flickered and then went out. Jake stared. "How did you do that?" Sivera didn't answer. She was staring at her hand in fear. "I've never done that before," she whispered. Jake leaned forward. "You're developing powers." She nodded. "This is getting serious," he said. "What if this bond turns you into something dangerous?" Sivera looked him in the eyes. "What if it turns me into something needed?" Jake couldn't argue with that. Later that evening, as they sat under the stars, Jake finally spoke the question in his heart. "Why do your people fear us so much?" Sivera took a deep breath. "Because long ago, our kind connected with humans, and it almost destroyed us." "Why?" "Because the link is strong. Too strong. When the bond forms, the Velari woman begins to feel everything. Love, pain, desire, grief. All of it. Multiplied. Most cannot survive it." Jake swallowed hard. "And you think that's what's happening to you?" Sivera didn't answer, but her eyes said yes. The next morning, Jake woke up to find the forest around the cave covered in floating light particles. He stepped outside and looked up. The sky had turned a strange shade of green. Birds flew in circles. Even the trees swayed strangely, as if listening to a silent song. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was Sivera, eyes closed, arms lifted. She was floating. Her feet were no longer touching the ground. The link was awakening something greater than either of them expected. The hunt begins. The air felt heavier that morning. Jake stood just outside the cave, staring at Sivera with wide eyes. She was still floating above the ground, eyes shut, arms raised gently like a tree reaching toward the sky. Her long silver hair flowed as if underwater, and the small lights swirling around her moved with a rhythm that felt ancient and alive. Jake stepped forward, unsure if he should speak or just watch. "Sivera," he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly. And in that moment, he saw something new inside them. A glowing storm, quiet but full of power. She slowly lowered to the ground, her bare feet touching the earth, like a leaf settling onto water. "I didn't mean to do that," she said softly. "What was that?" Jake asked. "The link is growing," she replied, voice shaking slightly. "The bond between us is awakening old abilities, things the Velari have not used for thousands of years." Jake blinked. "You're becoming a god, or something." Sivera shook her head. "No, but I'm no longer just Velari, and I'm not fully human either." Far away, in the deep forest shadows, Kale stood still, hidden behind a tree. He held a silent drone device in one hand, recording everything. He had been tracking them for days, watching Sivera change. He had seen the fire bending to her. He had seen her absorb heat, and now she was floating. "She is no longer one of us," Kale said to himself. "She is becoming something dangerous." He pressed a button. A red signal shot into the sky. In the heart of the Velari village, Elder Vuna watched as the red flare bloomed across the clouds. The hunt had begun. "Send the watchers," she said. "Are we bringing Sivera back?" one asked. Vuna closed her eyes. "No, If she resists, we silence her. Back in the cave, Jake and Severa were packing quickly. Severa had seen the red flare too. What was that? Jake asked. It's a hunter's signal, she said. My people have found us. Jake grabbed a sharp stick and tied it to a stone, his makeshift spear. Then we fight. No, Severa said. We run. Why? Because they don't come to talk. They come to erase. Jake looked at her. You mean kill? Severa nodded slowly. They think I'm tainted now, changed by a human. That makes me a danger. Jake swallowed. And me. They'll try to capture you. Or worse. Jake tightened his grip on the spear. Then let's make sure they don't. They moved fast through the woods, staying low, using the thick blue grass to hide. Severa knew every path, every tree, every root that could trip them or save them. But the watchers were trained too. 3 silent Velari moved in shadows behind them, cloaked in bending light, voices still as stone. They followed the bond. They could feel Severa now, through the link. It called out like a drumbeat across the forest. Hours passed. Jake's legs burned, but he kept going. Severa moved like wind, silent, quick, and aware of everything around her. We need to rest, Jake panted. Severa shook her head. They're too close. Suddenly, an arrow flew past and struck a tree beside them with a sharp thunk. Jake dropped to the ground. We're under attack. Severa raised her hands. A sudden pulse of light burst from her palms and spread out in all directions like a wave. The trees shook. The ground glowed. And for a brief second, time seemed to slow. The watchers, caught in the blast, stumbled backward. One of them fell unconscious. Another dropped his weapon. Jake looked around, stunned. You did that. Severa's hands trembled. I didn't mean to. No, keep meaning to. That was amazing. But Severa looked afraid. This isn't power. This is the link pushing through me. I don't know how long I can control it. They found shelter inside a tree cave, a hollowed ancient root system shaped like a dome. Severa sealed the entrance with vines and closed her eyes, sending her energy into the walls. This will hide us. For a while. Jake sat down, breathing hard. You okay? He asked. Severa nodded, but inside, her chest was burning. Each time she used her powers, she felt less herself, as if the old Severa was being replaced by something new, something that didn't belong to this world. Jake looked at her closely. I think I know why your people fear the link. Severa turned her eyes toward him. Because it changes you, he said, and when people change, others feel left behind. Severa nodded. And some would rather destroy change than accept it. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He watched Severa sit across the tree cave, staring at her hands, glowing faintly. Severa, he said quietly, do you regret saving me? She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, no. I regret not knowing what would happen, but I don't regret you. Jake smiled softly. Then we'll face this together. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt anchored. At dawn, the watchers returned to the village, battered and beaten. Kale dropped to his knees before Elder Vuna. She's no longer Velari, he spat. She attacked us with forbidden light. Vuna looked to the sky. Then it is true, she said. The prophecy is unfolding. We must kill her, Kale shouted, before she becomes something no one can stop. Vuna raised a hand. No, she said calmly. We let the link finish. We let them reach the gate. The gate? Kale asked, frowning. If they cross it, Vuna said, then we will see the future written in their blood. Far away, as the sun began to rise, Severa and Jake stood on a cliff overlooking a distant valley glowing with strange lights. What is that? Jake asked. Severa pointed. That is the gate of two worlds, she said. If we reach it, I might find the truth about what I'm becoming." Jake looked at her. "Then let's get there first." What she's becoming. The wind howled across the cliffs as Severa and Jake stood in silence. Below them stretched the Valley of Crossing, a glowing field of crystal grass, alive with light and whispers. In the center of it, tall and ancient, stood the Gate of Two Worlds. Severa's silver hair danced in the wind, her skin glowing faintly under the dawn. She was changing, and she could feel it more every hour. They descended slowly, following a narrow path that wound between sharp rocks and glowing moss. Jake walked behind her, watching how the ground lit up under her footsteps. The light came from her, not the world. She was like a living star now, shedding Valeri skin and becoming something entirely new. "How do you feel?" Jake asked softly. Severa didn't turn around. "Like I'm being pulled in two directions," she said. "Part of me wants to keep going. The other part wants to run back and never let the gate see me." "Why?" "Because once I step through, I might not be me anymore." They reached the base of the cliff and stepped into the soft, glowing grass. Severa paused, kneeling down to touch the light. It pulsed under her fingers. She heard voices, not loud, not in words, but memories, songs, and emotions from ancient times. It was like the land itself knew her. Jake crouched beside her. "Is the gate really magical?" Severa nodded. "It's where the first link happened. Between a Valeri and a human warrior, before war, before fear. What happened to them? No one knows, only that they crossed together, and the world changed after." Jake looked toward the gate. Two stone pillars rising from the ground like guardians, carved with strange symbols that shimmered faintly. "Then we do the same," he said. "We walk through together." As they stepped closer to the gate, Severa's glow began to shift. No longer gold, but a soft violet, something never seen among her kind. She stumbled. Jake caught her before she fell. "You okay?" Severa held her head. "The link, it's pulling memories. From you, from me, from places we've never even been." "Like what?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "I saw Earth, but not your Earth. A broken world. One where Valeri were hunted." Jake froze. "What?" Severa nodded slowly. "Something bad is coming. I don't know what it is yet, but the gate is waking it up." Suddenly, a flash of motion to their left. Kale appeared from the shadows, spear in hand, eyes burning with hate. "You should have stayed hidden, Severa," he growled. Jake moved protectively in front of her. "Don't come closer." Kale laughed. "The human thinks he can protect her. How sweet." Severa stepped forward. "Please, we don't want to fight." "No," Kale said, "but I do." He lunged. Jake tackled him mid-sprint. They rolled through the grass, fists flying. Kale was stronger, but Jake was faster. Years of soldier training surged through him as he dodged and struck. But Kale wasn't alone. Two more watchers emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. Severa raised her hands, and the light exploded from her body. Waves of violet energy blasted outward, knocking all three attackers to the ground. Jake shielded his eyes. When the light faded, he looked up and gasped. Severa was floating again, but this time her body had changed. Her feet no longer touched the ground. Her skin shimmered like starlight, and her eyes were pure white, glowing like suns. Kale stared in terror. "She's not Valeri anymore," he whispered. "She's something else." Then he ran. Severa slowly descended, her feet brushing the earth. Her hands trembled. She looked at Jake, tears falling down her face. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I just wanted to help you." Jake stepped toward her. "I know, but maybe this was always supposed to happen." Severa shook her head. "You don't understand. My people fear this transformation. They think it will bring destruction." Jake looked around. "But I don't see destruction. I see light. I see hope. She looked up at him, her expression torn. Then why? Why do I feel so scared? Jake took her hands. Because you're still you, even with all this power. Am I? She whispered. Yes, he said. You're still Severa, the girl who saved me when she had every reason to leave. They stepped toward the gate together. As they crossed the threshold between the stones, a wave of light passed over them. Everything fell silent. The wind stopped. The grass froze. And then, they were no longer on Sailor 9. They stood in a white space with no ground, no sky, just stars floating all around them. Severa gasped. This is the space between worlds, she said. This is where the first link was formed. From the stars, two shapes began to form. Two ancient beings, one Velari and one human, locked in an embrace of light. Their voices echoed in Severa and Jake's minds. You have awakened the link once more. Two hearts, two species, one bond. But not all are ready for peace. You must choose. The light between the two beings shifted, showing visions of war, peace, and a future yet to be written. Jake stepped forward. What choice? The beings answered. To remain what you are, or become something new. Something powerful enough to unite both worlds. Severa looked at Jake. I don't want to lose myself. Jake held her gaze. Then let's find a way to stay ourselves, and still become what's needed. They reached toward each other, and as their hands touched, the gate exploded in a burst of violet energy that shot through space and time. In the Velari village, Elder Vuna felt the tremor. She looked to the sky and whispered, She has crossed. Behind her, Kale returned with a message of warning. She's no longer one of us. Vuna nodded slowly. No, she's something greater. Back at the gate, Severa and Jake stood in the same spot, but the world looked different. Severa turned to him. I saw something inside you. Jake hesitated. I need to tell you something, he said. I wasn't just a soldier. I was part of a team sent to study the Velari bond. Your people were part of a secret mission. Severa's eyes widened. You knew. Jake nodded, shame in his eyes. But I never expected to be saved, or changed, or to feel this. Then this was all a lie. No, Jake said firmly. It started with orders, but it became something real. You made it real. Severa looked away, her heart pounding. Then what happens now? Jake stepped beside her, facing the glowing valley. Now we decide who we want to be. Together. A taste of humanity. The portal shimmered like liquid glass, floating silently in the middle of the ancient gate. Severa stared at it, her heart pounding. The world on the other side was Earth, Jake's home, a place she had only seen in his memories, a place that didn't know she existed. Are you ready? Jake asked beside her, voice low. Severa's eyes flicked toward him. She had changed so much, her skin now a pale shimmer, her eyes glowing faintly even in the dark. Her body no longer needed rest or warmth, but her heart still beat with fear. I don't think they'll be ready for me, she said. Jake gave a small smile. They weren't ready for me either, but you'll be okay. I'll be with you. She nodded. Together, they stepped into the light. The transition was fast, cold, like being pulled through time and sound. And then, they were there. The portal snapped shut behind them. Severa blinked at the new sky, gray, smoky, and crowded with machines. Flying ships zipped across the clouds. Tall buildings stabbed at the heavens. The air smelled like oil and noise. They were standing in a back alley near the outskirts of the city. Far off in the distance, the skyline of New Terra, Earth's largest human metropolis, sparkled beneath a steel-blue sunset. Severa gasped. So much metal. No trees. This is Sector 9, Jake said, one of the cleaner zones. Cleaner? Jake didn't answer. They stayed hidden as Jake led her through narrow streets and secret tunnels. He knew where the security cameras were, where to avoid the patrol drones. "We need to reach someone I trust," he said. "Someone who can help us before others find out what you are." Severa nodded but remained silent. Her senses were overwhelmed. The emotions in this city were loud: anger, stress, hunger, and something else: emptiness. "They're also distant," she said softly, "even when they're close to each other." Jake looked back at her. "Yeah, that's Earth." They reached a hidden base deep beneath the city, Unit 12, an off-the-record science division Jake used to work with. Inside, bright lights, armed guards, and scanners greeted them. Jake showed his old ID chip. A voice confirmed his clearance, but several red lights blinked when Severa stepped in. "Unknown species detected. Organic energy spike detected." Guards raised weapons. Severa raised her hands, glowing softly. "She's with me," Jake said quickly. "She's not a threat." But Severa's glow had already caught attention. Dr. Mara Illan, the head scientist, rushed into the room. Her eyes widened when she saw Severa. Is she Valerie?" Jake nodded. "She's more than that now." Mara stared at Severa like she was a miracle or a weapon. They placed Severa in a glass-walled observation room. Not a prison, but it felt like one. She sat calmly, answering questions, letting them scan her with blinking machines and buzzing lights. But she never let them take a blood sample. "Your biology is off the charts," Mara whispered to Jake. "Her cells heal faster than anything we've seen. She's not just alien. She's something new, something evolved." Jake looked at Severa through the glass. "She's not a test subject." Mara nodded, but her eyes gleamed with curiosity. "You know this will get out, right? The government's already tracking energy spikes like hers. If they find her, they'll try to use her," Jake finished. That night, Severa asked for real food. Not nutrient bars or packets, but something human. Jake brought her a simple bowl of warm soup. She held the spoon gently, sniffed the steam, and smiled. "You eat this often?" Jake chuckled. "Sometimes. It's comfort food." She took a small bite and paused. A tear rolled down her cheek. "What is it?" Jake asked. "It's not just the taste," Severa said. "It's the feeling. It's like someone loved whoever made this." Jake sat beside her. "That's the human part of food. It's not just for the body. It's for the heart." She smiled faintly. "Then I want more of that." Meanwhile, far above the city, in the orbiting human military satellite known as Sentinel Prime, red alerts flashed. An energy pulse, traced to Earth's surface, had triggered global defense warnings. "Sir, we've confirmed it's the same energy signature recorded during the Valerii-human conflicts. We had a live Valerii hybrid on Earth," the commander said. "Orders." The commander stared at the screen, watching Severa's image pulled from a hidden satellite cam. "Capture her, or eliminate her." Back underground, Jake and Severa talked late into the night. "I used to think Earth was broken," Jake said. "Too loud, too cruel, too cold. And now?" Severa asked. "Now I think it's just lost, waiting for someone to remind it how to feel again." Severa tilted her head. "You think that's me?" "I think it started the day you fed me." They smiled. But just as Jake reached for her hand, a siren blared across the facility. "Warning. Perimeter breached. Unidentified craft inbound." Jake jumped up. "They found us." Severa stood too, already glowing. "Do we run?" Jake looked toward the exit. Then he looked back at her. "No. This time, we stand." Moments later, the ceiling shook. Dust rained down. A blast echoed through the halls as military androids and black-suited commandos stormed the base. Mara tried to stop them. "She's not a threat." But no one listened. Jake grabbed Severa's hand and pulled her into the back corridor. "This way, emergency exit." But before they could reach the hatch, a pulse cannon fired. The blast hit the wall behind them, throwing Jake forward. Severa screamed. Jake lay still, smoke rising from his back. She ran to him, glowing brighter than ever. Her hands touched his chest, and the light exploded. A massive wave of energy burst from her body, knocking back the soldiers and tearing through the base like a windstorm made of stars. Lights shattered, walls cracked. The air filled with pure, humming power. When it cleared, Severa stood over Jake, her hands still glowing, her face full of pain and fury. Jake coughed and sat up. "You healed me." Severa nodded, breathing hard. "And now they know what I am." Jake looked around. Soldiers lay stunned. Even the machines had stopped. "We have to leave," he said. "No," Severa replied. "I came here to understand humanity." She stepped into the hallway where cameras were still rolling, facing the broken machines and the people who had feared her. "Then let them see what I've become." She let him in. The smoke slowly cleared. Severa stood in the center of the ruined hallway, glowing with violet light. Her arms were raised gently at her sides, not in anger, but in surrender. Her feet hovered just above the broken ground. Around her, human soldiers lay unconscious. Machines flickered and sparked, and walls trembled from the energy she had released. But her eyes were calm. Behind her, Jake struggled to his feet. His body still burned with pain from the pulse blast, but he ignored it. He could only see her. "Severa, they'll come again." "I know. Then we need to run." Severa slowly turned toward him. "No more running," she said quietly. "If I keep running, they'll only keep fearing me. If I fight, they'll call me a weapon." She looked down at her own glowing hands. "But if I show them my heart, maybe they'll see what I really am." News spread fast. Within minutes, world leaders, military commanders, and the media received live footage of the energy blast, of Severa healing Jake, of her glowing body, of the power that could flatten a base with a wave of her hand. Half the planet called her a miracle. The other half called her a threat. In the skies above Earth, Sentinel Prime received final clearance. Target confirmed. Hybrid Villari. Location locked. Prepare the orbital strike. Back underground, alarms began to wail again. Orbital cannon charging. Jake stared at the blinking red lights. "They're going to wipe this entire sector." Severa didn't flinch. "Let them." Jake grabbed her arms. "No, we're leaving. I'll protect you." "You already did," she whispered, touching his cheek. "But this isn't about me anymore. It's about both of us. About the link." He shook his head. "I don't want to lose you." She looked into his eyes, voice trembling. "Then let me show them who I really am." Severa walked calmly to the top of the broken research tower. The wind howled. Sirens screamed. Lights in the sky glowed red. Hundreds of cameras locked onto her image. She stood at the edge and raised both hands. "People of Earth," her voice echoed, not just through the air, but through every screen, every device. "I am Severa. I am not human. I am not your enemy." She took a deep breath. "I gave a human food. I shared with him what my people once feared. And in return, I felt what your kind hides behind war and fear. I felt your pain, your loss, your hunger for peace." She held up her hands. "And I felt your love. You taught me what it means to care, to protect, to hope. So now I ask you, not to accept me, but to let me show you that fear is not the only path. Let me prove that unity doesn't require bloodshed." A soft tear rolled down her cheek. "Let me in." In the control room of Sentinel Prime, fingers hovered over the firing button. A technician hesitated. "Sir, she's speaking." The commander growled. "She's manipulating us. A weapon that talks is still a weapon." "But, sir, she hasn't harmed anyone. She protected a soldier. She healed him. The technician looked around. If we strike now, we destroy the proof that peace is possible. The commander hesitated, and then a soft voice echoed through the room. It was from another screen. This is Captain Elias of the Terran Peace Council. I am overriding this strike. That woman saved one of ours. She made a choice to speak, not to kill. We owe her the same. Abort the strike. Silence. Then, one by one, the red lights on the targeting screen faded. Back on Earth, Severa slowly lowered her arms. The clouds above her calmed. The glowing lights faded. The ground stilled, and for the first time since arriving, Earth listened. Jake climbed the broken stairway to her side. He reached her at the rooftop, wind brushing through their hair, and looked into her glowing eyes. "You did it," he whispered. Severa nodded. "No, we did." They stood in silence, watching the sun rise behind the wrecked cityscape, broken but beautiful. 2 days later, a formal message was sent across all Earth territories and Valeri satellites. We confirm the existence of a living, peaceful Valeri-human hybrid. Her name is Severa. She is not a threat. She is a bridge. In the weeks that followed, Earth slowly opened its arms, carefully, hesitantly, but it did. Severa was allowed to stay. She was given a voice, not just in science labs, but in peace councils, in conversations that had never welcomed her kind before. Some still feared her, some still hated her, but many were inspired. Jake walked with her through a public park one evening. Children ran across green grass. Drones flew quietly above, watching but not interfering. He handed her a small box. "What is it?" she asked, smiling. "A gift." She opened it. Inside was a silver pendant. It glowed softly, half of it shaped like a Valeri sun, the other a human star. "It's our bond," Jake said. "Our story." Severa blinked back tears. "I've never had a gift before. Now you have me." She looked into his eyes, searching. "You really mean that?" Jake stepped closer. "You let me in, Severa, when the whole galaxy told you not to. When your people warned you, when mine hunted you, when the world feared you, you still let me in." He took her hand. "Now it's my turn." She smiled. "Then come closer." And under the soft glow of stars, human and alien, they kissed. EPILOGUE. Years later. A school on New Terra. Children, both human and Valeri, sit in a circle. A small girl raises her hand. "Teacher, is it true that humans and Valeri were enemies?" The teacher, an older woman with long silver-streaked hair and warm eyes, smiles gently. "Yes, once, a long time ago." "What changed?" The teacher leans forward. "One girl, one rule, one meal." "What do you mean?" The teacher points to a painting on the wall, a woman with glowing eyes, and a man by her side, both standing before a shining gate. She broke the rule. She gave a human food. And in doing so, she gave him something more. What did she give? The teacher smiled. She gave him hope.